You might want to clear out your browser history next time." The words hit me like a thunderclap. I froze, my hand mid-reach for the coffee cup on the table. When I looked up, Ethan was standing in the doorway, his lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "What?" I asked, my voice catching. He tilted his head toward the laptop on the counter, where he had been working for the past hour, fixing what I had vaguely described as sluggish performance. His gaze was steady but unreadable, and the casual way he spoke only made my stomach tighten further. "Your browser history," he said again, his tone light but deliberate. "I saw a few interesting searches." Heat rushed to my face, and I immediately turned away, fumbling for something, anything that could mask the sudden wave of embarrassment washing over me. "I don't know what you're talking about," I muttered, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. He didn't push, he didn't need to. The look in his eyes told me he already knew. 3 years ago, I would have laughed at the absurdity of this situation. 3 years ago, my life was stable, predictable, and full of purpose. I was a wife, a stepmother, the matriarch of a household that revolved around family dinners, holiday traditions, and the quiet joys of ordinary days. But that was before Bill's heart attack. Before the sudden, crushing loss of the man who had been my partner, my confidant, my safe harbor. After he was gone, the house felt impossibly large, every corner echoing with the absence of his laughter. I tried to keep myself busy, gardening, volunteering, even taking up a book club, but no amount of distraction could fill the void. Nights were the hardest. Alone in bed, with only the quiet hum of the house for company, the loneliness would settle over me like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its weight. Ethan had been my only connection to the life I'd lost. At 28, he was everything his father had been at that age. Kind, driven, and quietly thoughtful, in ways that often caught me off guard. He visited often, checking in on me under the guise of fixing things around the house, or sharing dinner when his schedule allowed. I told myself it was just his way of honoring Bill's memory, of looking after the woman who had been a part of his family for so long. But lately, I'd started to notice things, little things, that unsettled me. The way his gaze lingered just a moment too long when we spoke. The way his hand would brush against mine when he passed me something. The way his smile felt warmer, more personal, as if it was meant only for me. And then there was me. It had started innocently enough, a late-night rabbit hole on the internet, looking up articles about loneliness and grief. But those articles had led to others, ones that delved into the complexities of relationships, the nature of intimacy, the ways we seek connection in the face of loss. The house was silent after Ethan left, and I sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the garden. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I couldn't bring myself to move. My mind was tangled, my emotions swirling in a storm of fear, longing, and something dangerously close to hope. The memory of last night was still vivid, his hands on mine, the warmth of his lips, the way he looked at me as though I was the only thing that mattered. It had been years since I felt that way, since I allowed myself to be seen so completely. But now, in the harsh light of day, reality was impossible to ignore. The world wasn't kind to people like us. People who crossed lines, who let their hearts lead them into places they weren't supposed to go. And while I'd always thought of myself as strong, resilient, capable, the thought of facing the judgment of others made me feel impossibly small. The quiet hum of the house was broken by the sound of my phone vibrating on the table. I picked it up, my heart skipping when I saw Ethan's name. "Ethan, are you okay?" The message was simple, but it carried the weight of all the emotions we hadn't yet voiced. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a reply. "I don't know, I think so." His response came almost immediately. "Ethan, can I come over later? We need to talk." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Finally, I typed, "Okay." The hours between his message and his arrival stretched endlessly. I tried to distract myself with housework, but my mind kept drifting back to him, to the way his voice softened when he spoke to me, the way his touch felt like both a promise and a question. When I heard his truck in the driveway, my stomach twisted with equal parts anticipation and dread. Ethan stepped inside, his expression calm but serious. He held my gaze as he crossed the room, and when he reached me, he didn't hesitate. "We need to figure this out," he said, his voice steady but gentle. I nodded, my throat tight. I know. We sat down in the living room, the same place where everything had changed just a few nights ago. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. I meant what I said, he began. I'm not going anywhere. But I also know this isn't easy for you. So tell me, what are you thinking? What do you want to do? I took a deep breath, my hands twisting together in my lap. I don't know, I admitted. I want to be with you, but I'm scared, Ethan. I'm scared of what people will say, of what they'll think. Do you care about what they think more than you care about us? He asked, his tone calm but insistent. The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Of course not, I said quickly. But it's not that simple. It can be, he said softly. It's just you and me, no one else. What we feel, what we have, doesn't need anyone else's approval. His words were steady, confident, and they wrapped around me like a lifeline. But the doubts still lingered, whispering in the back of my mind. I don't know if I'm strong enough, I said finally, my voice trembling. You are, he said, his gaze unwavering. I've seen it. You just have to believe it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of quiet conversation and unspoken emotions. We didn't come to any decisions, but when he left, I felt lighter, as though a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had been lifted. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't facing the world alone. The next morning, I woke early, the sunlight streaming through the window. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the photo of Bill on the nightstand. I wish you were here, I whispered. I wish you could tell me what to do. But no answer came. Only the soft rustle of the wind through the trees outside. Ethan texted me later that day, asking if he could come by. When he arrived, he stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of hope and apprehension. I've been thinking, he said, stepping inside, about us, about what's next. What did you come up with? I asked, my heart pounding. He hesitated, then said, what if we leave? What if we start over somewhere new? His suggestion took me by surprise, and I felt my breath catch. Leave? Yeah, he said, his voice gaining strength. A fresh start. Somewhere we don't have to worry about anyone else, just you and me. The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating, and I didn't know how to respond. You don't have to decide now, he said quickly. Just think about it. I nodded, my thoughts racing. Okay, I said softly. That evening, I stood by the window, staring out at the garden as the sun dipped below the horizon. Ethan's words echoed in my mind, filling the quiet house with their weight. I didn't know what choice I would make, or if I even had the courage to choose him. But as I watched the first stars appear in the sky, I felt something stir deep inside me, a flicker of hope, fragile but insistent. And for now, that was enough. I hadn't intended to stumble upon the kinds of things Ethan had clearly seen in my browser history. But once I had, I couldn't stop. The content wasn't salacious, at least not overtly. It was thoughtful, nuanced, written by people who understood the ache of longing and the desire to feel alive again. But knowing that didn't make it any less mortifying to realize Ethan had seen it. I'm just teasing, he said now, breaking the tension with a grin that was both playful and disarming. I didn't mean to embarrass you. You didn't, I lied, forcing a tight smile as I finally turned to face him. His expression softened, and for a moment, the playful edge in his demeanor gave way to something gentler, more sincere. It's okay, no, he said quietly. I frowned. What is? To want more, he replied, his gaze steady. To want to feel connected. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. My breath caught, and I felt a flush creep up my neck, not from embarrassment this time, but from something else. Something I couldn't quite name. I should get back to fixing this, he said after a moment, breaking the silence. He turned back to the laptop, his shoulders relaxed, as if he hadn't just peeled back a layer of my carefully constructed walls. I stood there for a moment, watching him. The ease with which he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his movements, it all felt so familiar, and yet so different. As I picked up my coffee cup and moved to the other side of the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again. The way he had looked at me. The way his words had lingered like a soft echo in my mind. To want more. It was such a simple statement, but it unraveled something inside me. something I'd kept buried for far too long. And for the first time in years, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was right. The morning after Ethan's quiet observation, I tried to go about my day as usual. Breakfast, a little gardening, then a stack of laundry waiting to be folded. But my thoughts refused to cooperate. Every time I folded a shirt or reached for the watering can, his words from the night before echoed in my mind. To want more, to feel connected. It wasn't just what he'd said. It was how he'd said it. So calm, so certain, as if he understood me in a way I hadn't allowed anyone to in years. And that look in his eyes, steady and warm, had unsettled me more than I cared to admit. By mid-afternoon, I was in the kitchen, cleaning the counter for the third time, when I heard his truck pull into the driveway. "Hey," Ethan called, stepping into the house without knocking. He carried a toolbox in one hand and a small brown bag in the other. "I noticed the faucet in the bathroom dripping yesterday," he said, setting the toolbox on the counter. "Thought I'd come by and take care of it before it gets worse." "You didn't have to do that," I said, though my heart skipped a beat at his thoughtfulness. "It's no trouble," he replied, flashing that easy smile of his. As he unpacked the tools, I noticed the brown bag on the counter. "What's that?" I asked. "Oh," he said, almost sheepishly. "I stopped by the bakery on the way over. Thought you might like a muffin or two." He pulled out 2 oversized muffins, one blueberry, one chocolate chip, and set them on a plate. The gesture was small, almost inconsequential, but it sent a warmth through me that I hadn't felt in a long time. I watched as he worked on the faucet, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing strong, capable arms. His movements were efficient, confident, and I found myself transfixed in a way that felt dangerous. "You know," he said without looking up, "you should really let me help out around here more often." I raised an eyebrow, crossing my arms. "You're already here half the time. Any more, and I'd have to start charging you rent." He laughed, the sound rich and warm, and for a moment it felt like the house itself had come alive. "Fair enough," he said, turning to face me. "But seriously, I like being here. It's nice." His words caught me off guard, and I felt a flush creep up my neck. "Well, you're always welcome," I said softly, my voice faltering. Later, after the faucet was fixed and the muffins eaten, we found ourselves sitting in the living room, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Ethan leaned back on the couch, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "You know," he began, his tone casual, "I've been thinking about what you said the other day." "What did I say?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "About not needing much help around here," he said, his gaze steady. "I don't think that's true." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words. "I think you're so used to doing everything on your own that you don't realize how much you could use someone to lean on." His words struck a nerve, and I felt my defenses rise. "I've been managing just fine," I said, a little sharper than I intended. "I know you have," he said gently, "but that doesn't mean you have to." The softness in his voice, the way he looked at me like he truly saw me, made my chest tighten. I looked away, suddenly unable to hold his gaze. As the day wore on, the air between us seemed to shift. It wasn't tense, exactly, but it was charged, as if something unspoken lingered just beneath the surface. When it was time for him to leave, he stood by the door, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Thanks for letting me hang out today," he said, his voice light but his eyes serious. "You make it sound like I had a choice," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. His smile softened, and for a moment he just looked at me. "I'll see you soon," he said finally, his voice low. As he stepped outside, I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the day's events over and over in my mind. The way his voice had softened when he said my name, the warmth of his smile, the intensity of his gaze. It was impossible what I was feeling, ridiculous even. But no matter how much I tried to push it away, the truth was undeniable. Ethan made me feel seen. He made me feel alive, and that terrified me. Ethan came over the next evening, unannounced, but carrying the same effortless ease he always did. This time he brought a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, holding them up with a grin. "I figured we could celebrate my handiwork on the faucet," he said as he stepped into the kitchen. I laughed despite myself, shaking my head. "A dripping faucet isn't exactly cause for celebration, Ethan." "Maybe not," he replied, setting the bottle on the counter. But any excuse to spend some time together works for me. His words made my chest tighten, but I brushed it off, busying myself with finding the corkscrew. Fine, I said, keeping my tone light. But you're pouring. We ended up on the porch, the bottle of wine resting on the small table between us. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in soft purples and oranges. A warm breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and for a while, we simply sat there, talking about nothing and everything. Ethan told me about a new project at work, his voice animated as he described the details. I listened, smiling at his enthusiasm, but my thoughts kept drifting to the way the fading light played across his face, highlighting the sharp lines of his jaw and the warmth in his eyes. At one point, he leaned back in his chair, his glass in hand, and looked at me with a soft smile. You know, you should get out of the house more, he said. I raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing bad, he replied quickly. I just mean, you spend so much time here, keeping everything the way it's always been. But there's a whole world out there, you deserve to see it. His words stirred something in me, a mixture of longing and resistance. This is my home, I said quietly. It's where I feel safe. I get that, he said, his voice gentle. But maybe it's time to feel something more than just safe. The way he said it, calm, deliberate, and so full of meaning, left me momentarily speechless. I looked down at my glass, swirling the wine as I tried to collect my thoughts. Later, as the night deepened, we moved back inside. The house felt cozier in the dim light, the warm glow from the living room lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Ethan stretched out on the couch, his arm draped casually over the backrest, while I perched on the edge of the armchair, trying to ignore the pull I felt toward him. You always sit so far away, he said, his tone teasing. I'm perfectly comfortable here, I replied, though the slight tremor in my voice betrayed me. He tilted his head, studying me with that same steady gaze that always seemed to unravel me. You're allowed to be close to me, you know? I don't bite. His words sent a shiver through me, but I forced a laugh, shaking my head. I'm fine where I am, Ethan. All right, he said softly, though his eyes never left mine. As the conversation drifted into quieter territory, the air between us seemed to grow heavier, charged with something unspoken. I could feel his gaze on me, and though I tried to focus on the glass in my hands, my heart raced with every passing moment. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, he said suddenly, breaking the silence. What about it? I asked, keeping my tone as steady as I could. About doing everything on your own, he replied. About not letting anyone help. I frowned, unsure of where this was going. What about it? I think you're scared, he said simply. The bluntness of his words took me by surprise, and I felt my chest tighten. Scared of what? Of letting someone in, he said, his voice soft but unwavering. Of letting yourself want something more. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. He was right, and we both knew it. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You don't have to be, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not with me. The vulnerability in his words, the quiet plea in his tone, broke something inside me. I set my glass down on the table, my hands trembling, and looked at him. Ethan? I began, but I didn't know how to finish. He stood, crossing the room in a few short steps, and crouched in front of me, his hands resting lightly on my knees. You don't have to say anything, he said softly. Just let me show you. His hands moved slowly, hesitantly, as if he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. When his lips met mine, it was like the world tilted on its axis. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened, becoming something neither of us could control. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself melt into him, every doubt and hesitation dissolving in the warmth of his touch. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my heart pounding in my chest. Ethan rested his forehead against mine, his hands still holding me as if he was afraid to let go. I've wanted to do that for so long, he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. I closed my eyes, my hands gripping his arms as I tried to steady myself. This is crazy, I whispered. Maybe, he said, his lips brushing against my temple. But it feels right. His words sent a shiver through me, and I knew he was right. It did feel right, no matter how much I wanted to deny it. That night, after he left, I sat alone in the living room, the memory of his touch still lingering on my skin. I knew we'd crossed a line, one we couldn't uncross, and the weight of that realization pressed down on me like a stone. But beneath the fear and doubt, there was something else. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next morning, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my untouched cup of coffee. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that felt more oppressive than comforting, and my thoughts were anything but calm. Ethan's kiss lingered in my mind like the echo of a melody I couldn't forget. The warmth of his touch, the intensity of his gaze, it was all too vivid, too real. I couldn't deny what had happened or the way it had made me feel, but I also couldn't shake the guilt that gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. When the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway broke through the quiet, my heart skipped a beat. I stood quickly, my hands smoothing over my shirt as if I could somehow prepare myself for whatever came next. He stepped inside, his smile soft but uncertain, as if he wasn't sure how I'd react to him today. "Morning," he said, his voice calm but tentative. "Morning," I replied, my tone quieter than I intended. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us felt heavy, thick with the weight of everything that had gone unsaid. "I thought we could finish the movie we started the other night," he said finally, holding up a DVD case he'd brought with him. It was such a simple suggestion, so ordinary, and yet it carried an unspoken message that made my chest tighten. He wasn't going to push me, wasn't going to force me to confront what had happened before I was ready. "Sure," I said, forcing a small smile. We sat on the couch, the movie playing quietly in the background as the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows. Ethan sat close, closer than he normally would have, and though his hand didn't touch mine, I could feel the warmth of his presence beside me. I tried to focus on the movie, on the characters and the dialogue, but my mind kept drifting back to the night before, to the way his lips had felt against mine, to the way he had looked at me like I was the only thing that mattered in the world. "Are you okay?" he asked suddenly, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I looked at him startled. "What? You seem distracted," he said, his eyes searching mine. I hesitated, my hands twisting together in my lap. "I just have a lot on my mind," I admitted finally. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Is it about last night?" I froze, my breath catching. "Ethan, it's okay," he said quickly, his tone soothing. "I'm not trying to make this harder for you. I need to know where we stand." His honesty, his vulnerability was both comforting and terrifying. I looked away, my eyes falling to the floor. "I don't know," I said softly. "I don't know what this is or what it means. All I know is that it's complicated." "I know it is," he said, leaning forward slightly, "but it doesn't have to be, not if we don't let it." Before I could respond, his hand brushed against mine, a small tentative gesture that sent a shiver through me. I looked up, and the intensity in his gaze made my heart race. "I care about you," he said quietly, "more than I probably should. And I know you feel the same." I opened my mouth to deny it, to push him away, but the words wouldn't come. He was right, and we both knew it. "You make me feel alive," I whispered finally, my voice trembling. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm more than just this empty shell of a person." "Because you are," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You're more than you give yourself credit for, and you deserve to be happy." The tears that had been threatening finally spilled over, and I felt his hand tighten around mine, grounding me in the moment. When he leaned in, I didn't pull away. His lips met mine in a kiss that was both soft and urgent, filled with all the emotions we hadn't been able to put into words. His hands slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself give in, the last of my resistance crumbling under the weight of my longing. His touch was gentle but insistent, his hands exploring me with a reverence that made my breath catch. I felt his warmth, his strength, and for the first time in years, I let myself be vulnerable. The world outside faded into nothingness, leaving only the sound of our breaths and the steady rhythm of our hearts. Every kiss, every touch was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that I didn't have to face the world by myself anymore. Afterward, we sat together on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. His arm was draped over my shoulders, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice low and soothing. I nodded, my head resting against his chest. "I think so," I said, my voice barely audible. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, his hold on me tightening. "I'm glad," he murmured. The quiet between us was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos of my thoughts. I didn't know what the future held, or if this was something we could sustain. But in that moment, with his arms around me, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. When he left that evening, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. I stood by the window, watching as his truck disappeared down the driveway, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new. Something terrifying. Something wonderful. And for now, that was enough. The days that followed were both exhilarating and excruciating. Ethan continued to visit, always with a reason. A leaky faucet, a faulty light switch, or just the excuse of sharing a meal. But each time the unspoken weight of what had happened between us hung in the air. We didn't talk about that night, not directly. Instead, our connection deepened in the quiet moments. The way his hand would linger on mine when passing a dish, the way his eyes would follow me across the room, the way his smile seemed softer, more intimate. But I could feel the dam breaking. Every glance, every touch, every stolen moment was building toward something neither of us could control. It was a Friday evening when it finally happened. Ethan had come over to fix the loose railing on the back porch. The sun was setting, casting the yard in golden light, and I watched him from the kitchen window as he worked, his movements precise and efficient. There was something hypnotic about the way he moved, the quiet confidence he exuded. I told myself to stop staring, to focus on the vegetables I was chopping for dinner, but my thoughts kept drifting back to him. When he finally came inside, he was sweaty and disheveled, but his smile was as warm as ever. "All done," he announced, wiping his hands on a towel I handed him. "Thank you," I said, my voice softer than I intended. His eyes lingered on mine for a moment, and I felt my breath hitch. "Dinner smells good," he said, breaking the silence. "Almost ready," I replied, turning back to the cutting board. But before I could pick up the knife, I felt his hand on my arm, stopping me. I turned to face him, and the intensity in his gaze made my chest tighten. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Of course." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the bottle of wine I'd opened earlier untouched between us. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, his hands clasped together. "I can't keep pretending this isn't happening," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Ethan?" I began, but he held up a hand, stopping me. "Let me finish," he said softly. I nodded, my heart pounding. "I know this is complicated," he continued. "I know there are a million reasons why we shouldn't do this, why it doesn't make sense, but none of that changes how I feel about you." His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, my chest tightening as the weight of his confession settled over me. "I don't know how to make this work," I admitted, my voice trembling. "I don't even know if it's possible." "It is," he said firmly, "if we want it to be." I looked away, my eyes falling to the table. "People would never understand," I said softly. "Let them think what they want," he replied. "This isn't about them, it's about us." Before I could respond, he stood, moving around the table to crouch in front of me. His hands rested on my knees, his touch warm and grounding. "I care about you," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering, "more than I've ever cared about anyone, and I know you feel the same, even if you're afraid to admit it." His words broke something inside me, and I felt the first tear slip down my cheek. "Ethan, it's too much," I whispered. "It's not," he said, his hands tightening on mine. "It's exactly what it's supposed to be. You just have to let yourself believe it." When he kissed me, it wasn't hesitant or tentative. It was raw, unrestrained, filled with all the emotions we'd been holding back for so long. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me closer, and I felt myself give in, the last of my resistance crumbling. We moved without thought, our bodies tangling together as the world around us faded into nothingness. His touch was reverent yet insistent, his lips tracing a path across my skin that left me breathless. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Truly, deeply alive. The hours passed in a blur of warmth and connection. Every touch, Every kiss, every whispered word weaving a tapestry of intimacy that left no room for doubt. When it was over, we lay tangled together on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm shadows on the walls. His arm was draped over my waist, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on my skin. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice low and soothing. I nodded, my head resting against his chest. "I think so," I said, my voice barely audible. He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, his hold on me tightening. "I meant what I said," he murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, the weight of what we'd done began to settle over me. I stood by the window, watching the early sunlight spill across the yard, and felt a mixture of emotions I couldn't untangle. Ethan joined me, his arms wrapping around my waist as he rested his chin on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Everything," I admitted. He pressed a kiss to my temple. "We'll figure it out," he said softly. "Together." I wanted to believe him, to let myself lean into the warmth of his promise. But the doubts lingered, whispering in the back of my mind. When he left later that morning, I sat alone in the living room, the memory of his touch still lingering on my skin. I knew we'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the weight of that realization pressed down on me like a stone. But beneath the fear and doubt, there was something else. A flicker of hope, fragile but steady. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new. Something terrifying. Something wonderful. And for now, that was enough.